Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18 plus.
Somebody stole our website.
Oh no, whatever shall we do?
I mean, I guess you could go to the new website, http://breakingmathpodcast.app with no www for all you old timers.
So breakingmathpodcast.app? I mean, if you're into that sort of thing.
Hey, Breaking Math fans. First, I want to thank you for listening. I have an important message for everyone. You can start your own podcast right now with Anchor. Anchor lets you create and distribute your own podcast. Just get an idea, record, and upload. It's just that easy. Anyone can do it. I'm on my way to accomplishing my dream, and you can too. Just get on your device's app store and download Anchor. It contains everything you need to make a podcast. With Anchor, you can put your podcast on all the big platforms. Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon, and more. Reach the whole world with Anchor. Best of all, Anchor is free. You have nothing to lose with a free platform. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Baca, and what you're about to hear is part 2 of an episode recorded by the podcasting network Blank for Non-Blank, of which Breaking Math, along with several other podcasts, is a part. To check out part 1, just download our catalog. To check out more Blank for Non-Blank content, you can click on the link in the episode description shown by your podcasting player, or go to tinyurl.com/batteryhorse. And of course, for more info and interactive widgets, you can go to breakingmathpodcast.com. You can support us at patreon.com/breakingmathpodcast, and you can contact us directly at breakingmathpodcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoy the second part of the first Blank for Non-Blank group episode. Thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you skipped over part 1. You are now listening to part 2 of the first ever Blank for Non-Blank group episode. The episode is about learning, and in this part of the conversation, we go very much off topic into kind of subtopics, and we talk about perception, specifically how perception can be distorted. We talk about the framework of perception. We talk about social concepts and many other things that, quite frankly, I cannot remember. I know that I really had an excellent time listening to this while it was happening. I had an excellent time listening to it while I was editing it. Every single time I go through, there is really never a time I listen to it and don't pick up anything new. I sound a lot like my professors, but that's because they're eloquent. I hope you enjoy this episode, and if you'd like an introduction to our panelists, very quickly, we have Seth Wilson from Let's Talk Talk, who is coming at this from a linguistic perspective. We have Chris Cogswell from the Mad Scientist podcast, who is generally a sciencey guy. We have, what's his face? Oh, Jonathan. We have Mr. Jonathan Baca from the Breaking Math podcast, who is an excellent computer programmer and knows a great deal about algorithms and likes math and sounds like a very good math teacher. Please enjoy.
Everything's conscious, though, which I actually believe.
Which
I believe that
you believe that all things are conscious?
I believe that a ball, when it hits the ground, creates a spark of consciousness.
Ah, that's interesting.
Could you elaborate?
Sure, a ball hitting the ground creates a little spark of it. Just like it maybe not doesn't know it's a ball. It probably doesn't. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't. There's just like a little like click.
Like so far, we've done a pretty good job of covering the problems primarily with like learning and free will. And I actually have a few more questions about that if we have time. But beneath learning, there's consciousness or a general awareness of what is going on. Like I read an Aldous Huxley essay where he was talking about this kind of distinction, how there's one part of the mind that remembers facts and has a sort of a personal history and creates concepts and thinks thoughts, but then there's a sort of secondary part of the mind that when you raise your arm, you really have no clear idea of how you've done so. It's this involuntary part of the mind that is constantly there, and that is like the fundamental consciousness. My question is, what is consciousness? How can we best describe it, and how does it interact with the process of learning, and are they even different?
I want to illustrate that exact point that you said, like we're not quite aware of how we're able to, like I'm aware conceptually of how I'm able to lift my arm up, but I still don't know. I'm not like sort of meta aware of that. And I've thought about this issue a lot with Superman and his ability to fly. Is it active for him? Like, is it like picking your hand up? Can you just fly? So I feel like that's a pretty colorful way to introduce that question as well. Like it's quite different than, Martian Manhunter. Like Martian Manhunter is telekinetic, right?
Yeah, and
so
they just do it. It's
with his brain.
I'd say even thoughts are involuntary.
He's actively doing it, right? Yeah. Well, see, that's the question.
I'd say evidence that consciousness is not dependent upon choices that we make is things like just last night, for example, I had sleep paralysis all night and I saw imps. Ugh. And imps are, if you don't know, they're products of the mind. They're terrifying. They're basically creatures that don't exist and have no distinct shape.
Yeah, you should stop sleeping on your back, dude, because that's probably what's causing it.
I slept on the couch. My bed was too uncomfortable, but yeah.
Oh, no. I want to hear about the imp, so.
I do too.
Oh, yeah, so I consider myself conscious of that experience, but obviously I had no choice. And people argue, some people argue, and I've heard it argued, okay, that's the truth, I've heard it argued, that when you lucid dream, all you're doing is exerting a slight amount of dream control or perception of how you dream and then remembering it as though you decide. Because I've had lucid dreams where I don't fly. Sure. I go to the store and order like 30 lollipops. Like, what's that all about?
Lucid dreaming is a hilarious phenomenon. I was very into it about 7 years ago, and I'd try to practice it. But I would always end up gaining control and then immediately losing it. So I would I can fly, but then all of a sudden I would spin or something and it would just change. So it's like this, it's not an active thing. Like you try to exert some sort of control over it, but like you said, I'm curious as to whether you're just waking up and remembering it this way. I'm not sure if you're actually controlling your dreams at all.
So one really interesting thing is, I have obsessive compulsive disorder, and so part of the training process for getting better or getting over that, kind of the process of living with this, is what's known as cognitive behavioral therapy. And I don't know if any of you guys know what that is, or any of the listeners at home know what that is, but basically what it is you train your brain structures to respond differently to scary thoughts or phobic situations that would make you panic by throwing yourself into them and making you sit there with them, right? But it's conceptually it's extremely interesting, because what you're doing is you're trying to combat these things called intrusive thoughts, and they're kind of things like they're just sort of, for someone who doesn't have this kind of issue, you might have a thought like, I could, I don't know, pineapples are tasty, or, I could go to the store right now, or I could, whatever, I could take a nap, right? You'd have these thoughts and they wouldn't bother you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'd have thoughts that are completely out of the blue and seemingly distressing, right? You could have thoughts like, oh, that tree looks like a snake, or, I wonder if there's a monster under the bed, things like that. And so when you have obsessive compulsive disorder, what occurs is the brain doesn't let you get rid of those thoughts until they become a phobia almost, right? And so part of the treatment for that is literally training your brain to not involuntarily create, or rather, it's not, you can't control those involuntary thoughts. Those happen always to everyone, right? Right. Well, and most people just don't remember them. They don't notice them, right? The trick is to then train yourself to not let them continue to be an issue, or rather, I think the way that it was described to me that was really effective was, imagine you have so it goes in a fight or flight response. You have a scary thought, and then you immediately go into fight or flight if it's been traumatic to you in the past, right? You know that the sound of a gunshot means that something bad is happening, right? And so you'll immediately have a flash of panic and want to hide or something, right? The problem with someone with an anxiety disorder or something like OCD or something is that a non-dangerous situation gets linked to a feeling of anxiety. So it's something like, I mean, it's the same with phobias, right? You're on a tall building and you become phobic, and over time you just reinforce that by every time you get near a tall thing, you become scared and scared and scared, right? And so your brain now is trained, almost like Pavlovian conditioning, that every time you see this thing, panic kicks in. And so I find it fascinating, at least, that you can train the brain to respond differently to inputs that the brain is sending to you that you have no control over ultimately.
Right. But that's really my question for you is, I would say, do you think that your thoughts are voluntary, and is it only the reactions that are involuntary, or is it the thoughts as well?
No, well that's the thing, is that it's the thoughts themselves are involuntary. Right? They are
But then there's like a second you that is looking at those thoughts and saying, I don't want these. So which one is actually you, you know?
And then there's a third you that exists.
All of it's you.
And that's part of the difference between what we would consider to be cognition versus simply learning to pull in information and then spit it out in a useful way.
Well, sure. I mean, we all know that me as a human being, I have tiny little cells that are all individually alive as well. So it's not like it's an unheard of concept to be made of many parts, and especially internally.
Right.
So I mean, it's just incredible, but
it's it's just an interesting. I find it very fascinating that the brain can almost be tricked in that way, right? Being a scientist in the Boston area for a little while, I have a lot of friends that work in biology or in medical technology and things like that. And so one of the most interesting series of tests that have been going on relatively recently, at least, is the ability to literally shock the brain to cause different experiences to occur to someone, right?
Whoa. Yeah.
And a lot of these things happen. A lot of these things happen by accident, we find out. So one really famous one that happened not very long ago, and this actually didn't happen in Boston. This one happened in, I think, Alberta, Canada, or somewhere in Canada, maybe Ottawa. We can just name every area of Canada.
Montreal,
Quebec Toronto, Saskatchewan, it could have been anywhere. But the fascinating thing was they were trying to treat a female with epilepsy, right? And so what they were trying to do was, one of the treatments for epilepsy is to provide basically shock therapy to the brain to try and, I suppose it's to try and change the way that the brain responds to the stimuli, or maybe even to find what portion of the brain it is that's causing the epileptic seizures to occur. Do you know what I mean? Because if they don't know what structure it is, they may not know how to treat it. What they found, though, was when they were supplying this voltage to this woman's brain, at a certain area of the brain, she would notice basically like shadow people, dark figures in the room with her, kind of like the imps you were talking about. Right? She would notice that was occurring to her. And at another different area of the brain, this was the same researcher, I'm sure it was with a different person, but I mean, who knows? They claimed to be able to see, like the tunnel of light that people say they see when they die, right? That you're going to heaven or whatever.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Gabriel.
And we here at Breaking Math are big on many things. We're big on math, we're big on science, and we're big on learning.
Today, we are very excited to introduce our new sponsor, Brilliant.org, because they are big on the same things that we are. Brilliant is an amazing resource for anyone who, like you, loves to learn.
This partnership means a lot to us. I'd like to say off script that we know that our goal here is to teach people. I used to be a tutor, and teaching people is one of the greatest joys I've ever had. And Brilliant really jives with my worldview. So back on script, the best way to learn math is through active problem solving, and Brilliant.org emphasizes that a lot.
The other day, I was working through the course called The Joy of Problem Solving, and I was really impressed with the visuals, which help those who are struggling to master math. When I started the quiz called Flipping Pairs, I was really surprised that I could actually interact with the image, and that helped me to really work on my intuition to solve the problem.
And if you ever get stuck, you could just say, show me the solution. Click on that button. They provide some really, really nice scaffoldings to help you get a good grasp of the concepts to use and then work with them and then get through the quiz.
So I will just say you have to check this website out. Go to www.brilliant.org/breakingmath, which lets them know that we sent you. You've got to check it out, guys. It is great.
It really is. And now, on to the rest of the episode.
The patient basically had an out-of-body experience.
Well, when they almost die.
Right?
Nobody says that when they die.
Right, of course. Yeah, no, you're correct. You'll never guess what I saw. Yeah. No,
Jonathan,
when they almost die.
Yeah, I wanted to. You mentioned briefly a second ago that there's a third you. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you meant by that?
What I meant was the social you. The you that exists as a representation.
Okay.
Because
that's a concept.
I don't think there's a difference between a concept and a thing.
There is a difference, I think, because the concept can't do anything. Like if there is like a third one, which is just the conceptual one, that one isn't actually real, but we need it in order to categorize sort of things in the world and in our mental frameworks that we develop.
See, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, you should check out.
What I meant was the you that exists in the brains of people around you. When they talk about you, that conception changes. It's dynamic.
Oh, that's
and the reason why I say that is because, Chris, you did not come up with CBT. Somebody else came up with it, and that's part of this extended you, this sort of...
Yes. That is actually very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of one really famous concept in philosophy this is famous specifically in existentialism, is the concept of the other, right? Of how other people relate to you.
It's the Russians.
And that's kind of what you were getting at, I think. I think that's very interesting. This sense of how do we, because we don't always think of it that way, right? I mean, I think most people, when they think of their life, it's very easy to consider yourself to be the star of your own show.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, in order to understand other people's points of view, you have to experience something called ego loss, and I think we're all probably... And usually people will try to induce that with things like LSD in a scientific... so they have controlled studies where they'll do... Or they have before in the 70s where they would try to induce ego loss so that people could experience what it's like to see themselves in third person as not the main character of the universe. And it's a very interesting experience, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's just super fascinating. I mean, I would never have. And see, that's the thing. I don't think any of us. I mean, Jonathan, you brought it up, but I don't think if you had not brought that up, I don't think the three of the rest of us would have thought of that had we been talking the rest of the night.
No, a social understanding of yourself is very bizarre. Because I mean, in passing, I think we all think what do other people think of me? But we don't stop to think about that is a form of Seth, like the way that Chris sees Seth is Seth, right? It's interesting.
Right, and we also don't tend to think of ourselves. I mean, that's again, we're getting deep into philosophy.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I want to bring it back to some science.
But aren't there infinite Seths? Because nobody else's concept of Seth is the same as the other person's concept of Seth, including Seth's.
Okay. Well, now we're.
Is the coastline of Britain infinite? It's a fractal question.
Okay, not.
The limit as Seth approaches infinity is equal to.
Oh God, no,
we're getting there. The
recursive Seth. Seth is a Seth.
I was gonna say that might have been a joke for Jonathan and I, and like 5 other listeners who were like, haha, limit jokes. Although in my mind, you meta listeners are laughing, so that's great. Congratulations.
One thing I wanted to bring
all
up
the infinite
when
Seths
you're
are laughing also.
Oh yeah, when Chris, you're talking about obsessions and compulsions or whatever. Is that what they're called?
Yeah, that's what they're called. Yeah.
I suffer from a similar thing called intrusive thoughts, which are, I think, different because the content of them is intrinsically something that should, if it were to exist, be feared. I'm only comfortable talking about the violent ones.
So I have the same thing. It's complete. It's all within the same. I think for me, when I first noticed it as a thing that other people didn't have was when we were reading Jean-Paul Sartre in Freshman Existentialism. And it was like, and he mentions the story of the housewife who's sitting in the parlor of her home looking out the window, and she thinks to herself, I could jump out the window at this moment.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. That's the human condition that everyone experienced it. That, like, they call it the call of the void.
So,
like, it's designed to protect you, right?
Right. The difference is that when other people have those thoughts, it does not distress them for hours.
But then when it distresses you,
yeah. And I didn't mean to imply.
No. But that's the thing though. That's part. I mean, if you believe in this kind of idea of like social or psychological conditioning or whatever, that's the trick. The trick that it does. The reason that it happens is that your brain is, not making enough chemicals somehow, or making too much or whatever it is. I've never really gone into the biochemistry part of it too hard, but it's basically this idea that when other people have an intrusive thought, it doesn't recur. So like, it's kind of like that, everyone at home listening, I want you to not think about red elephants.
It's never.
Are you not thinking about them?
Actually, thinking about heffalumps.
Well, there we go. We're
Insert
doing
air
word
horns.
tricks now. I see how it is.
Insert air horns.
It's that trick of other people when they hear don't think about red elephants, they will think about it once and then maybe they'll move on in a couple of minutes. For someone with an anxiety like this or intrusive thoughts, like dealing with those things that it's a problem for them, it'll just keep coming back. Wow. And what it ends up turning out is that the longer that you try to make yourself feel better about the thought or its contents or even just having thought or whatever, the more you'll think about it, because you're like, well, I'm not going to think about red elephants. I would never buy a red elephant. You know what I mean? Why am I thinking about red elephants? Like, red's so stupid. That's such an ugly color. And elephants are ugly. I don't even like elephants. But you're still thinking about it, right?
But then it gets worse and worse and worse too.
Right. And it ramps up. It kind of, the intensity of it kind of crescendos and then goes down and then crescendos again. And so what ends up being the case is that the best way to stop having that anxious moment, and this is the same way with the red elephants argument, is to think about red elephants so much that they become boring.
Yeah, flatten them out.
You know what I mean? To think about them so much that your body is no longer responding in a fight or flight way, and you come down. And it's very, very similar again to the idea of like,
neuro-linguistic saturation. Like if
you're talking about semantic satiation?
Did I say it wrong? Like if I say like Clyde.
Yeah. If you say biscuit too many times, it starts becoming meaningless.
Yeah.
It's. I think it's very similar to that actually, and it's almost a. I like to think of it like working out a muscle or something, right? The longer you work it out, the less pain there's going to be in you lifting up a certain weight. You know what I mean?
I used to have this friend, Brianna, and the first time I had a thought about strangling her to death, I was like 8 years old at the mall. So every time I went to the mall, I thought about strangling her to death. And it was extremely bad. Like it distressed me. And then I started having the thoughts when I wasn't at the mall, anytime I was near like a shopping center, and then anytime I hung out with her, and it got worse and worse. So trying not to think about it. That happens to
everyone, but it bothers you and it's persistent to you, right? Is that what you're saying? Because obviously I've been, next to a very high cliff and say, wow, I could definitely throw myself off of this and I would be dead. And honestly, that's your brain telling you that you're in control of the situation and to not do that because it's not safe. So if I'm hearing you right, it's that it's persistent and ongoing and it will not leave you alone.
Yeah, and your brain because of what I have, which is a schizoaffective disorder, I think it's part of the brain just kind of likes to be creative with really messing with you. So it's like the thoughts get oddly specific. They build upon each other. There's the study that was done where they told people to not say polar bear, or I don't know if it was polar bear, it might have been a different word. It was some kind of animal, but to talk as fast as they could. And on average, they said polar bear several times a minute.
Wow. So it's just that's actually called priming, right? So you can do this all the time, like with pretty much anything. You can actually prime someone's grammar. If you're ever in a room full of people, start a sentence with "that I eat is good" or something, like starting it with a conjunction "that." It's super rare in English, but you'll find that everyone around you will be using it far more than they would ever use it in their normal life. Because so you can prime people with any word. So you can go in and say, epiphenomenon. So now you guys are going to have epiphenomenon on your head, in your brain, and you're going to find a reason to use it. So like maybe not now that I've told you that, but that may be a meta prime. Who knows? But so that happens. That happens not just with language, but obviously with just concepts at all. Like anytime you do something, you prime yourself. Or if you say, hey, don't do this, you're just priming them to do it. Right?
It's a whole concept behind why advertising works at all.
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah. You need this underwear. MeUndies, brought to you by MeUndies. Use the coupon code.
Okay, let's leave MeUndies out of it because my butt has never felt more comfortable. Okay, if MeUndies wants to sponsor my show, I'm going to jump on that deal.
They're lined with antimicrobial silver lining.
I don't even care. They're like made of silk or something. It's the best feeling in the world. One really, really interesting piece of this that I think
MeUndies.
You got me off the top. You got me off my train with MeUndies, man.
Or whatever.
I'm dying right now. What was it?
No, we were talking about intrusive thoughts and semantic association.
Got it. Okay, I'm back. I'm back with it now. Okay. One really interesting thing with this, and this is something that comes up on my show a lot because we deal with cases where people are seeing things that aren't like normal. They're not average kind of things you experience. And there's always the question of, well, that person must have been having a hallucination or something. And it's like the idea that hallucinations are much less common than they actually are, or misremembering things, right? And that comes down to this concept of we don't really talk to other people about how we think, right? I mean, before, at the very beginning, Seth, you said, well, you don't think in words, right?
Right.
And I immediately thought, oh crap, I do think in words.
No.
Do you think in words?
You know what I mean?
I mean, I understand. But like, here's the thing. To clarify a little bit for the folks at home and for everybody, for us, just for the sake of conversation, I'm not saying it's impossible to say words in your brain. You can. But when you think, you do not think in words. People can think without language, right? And, it's like, deaf people don't think in sign language.
There's an experiment I'd like to bring up where they put two sheets up like walls. They were white or some color. Then they put two sheets to make it a box, and these two are reds. They have red, white as a box. They put a banana behind one corner of the box, had the person walk around, and then after a while said, okay, what corner is it behind? And they were able to get most of the time. When they had that person reciting what somebody else was saying or reading a newspaper as they walked around, they only had a 50% chance of getting it right because they couldn't talk themselves through it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I actually find – so I have always thought – and this is, again, something very interesting, right? I have always thought that I think much more clearly when I say the things in my head and actually even sometimes visualize the words themselves or the functions, the math of what I'm thinking about, than if I try to do it visually.
Yeah, it's like rubber duck programming.
Yeah, like I have but that's something that. So when I have two stories that kind of go to this. When I was a kid, I used to hate sleeping in my Aunt Janice's house because when they turned the lights off in the guest room, whatever. She lived in Jersey and I grew up in New York. And so in New York, when you turn the lights off in your house, it's still like you can still read at night. You know what I mean? Because like it's bright. It's never dark in New York. You know what I mean? But in Jersey, she lived like in a forest and it was pitch black. And so at nighttime when they would shut the lights off, made of candy? No, go ahead. I would see almost like I would see stars. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it actually turns out it's what happened?
Phosphemes?
Yes, exactly. Oh. Yes. It turns out it's a relatively common phenomena, right? That children, when they close their eyes or even when they sit up, and adults too, right? I mean, if you rub your eyes, you'll see what I was seeing.
I do that on purpose all the time. It's fun.
It is fun, right? but it's just kind of, like a weird trick of the brain that happens to some people. You know what I mean? But when I was a kid, I was like, oh, good. I'm going blind. You know what I mean? Or like you know what I mean? You don't know what's going on. You're like you're 8 years old. You're in a terrifying forest in the middle of Jersey, terrifying as you know what I mean? Like it was scary, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't not scary for me until I was like 13 and we had the internet and I Googled it, or I'd not even Googled it. I would probably like Ask Jeeves did or something.
Oh my
horrible.
Lord.
You know what I mean?
Disgusting.
Yeah, I know. What
filthy.
Oh man. Gross. But
intrusive thought.
I had another experience like that when I was older in grad school. We were all out at a bar. It was like all the first year students, and we were all talking about like what our favorite music was and whatever. And a friend of mine at the bar with us was like, I actually can't, like, I don't get music. Like his brain doesn't, when he listens to music, his brain does not get the melody. He can tell you what the beat of the music is, just as like a factual thing.
Yeah.
Right? But he can't, like, he can listen to a jingle or a song. He can't whistle the song back to you.
Destonado.
Well,
I think that's
I mean, you know that like I have a friend who's getting his PhD in his PhD in music theory, or finishing up his master's, pursuing his PhD, and we have a couple episodes where we talk about that.
Yeah.
There's so much theory. I mean, not theory. I'm so sorry. There's so much social. There's such a huge social component to how we register music. There have been experiments in like sort of no contact tribal zones where they would play for like indigenous people in Brazil, and they would play. He mentioned one specific instance where they played the theme from Psycho, and the villagers thought it was like a very exciting celebratory song because it was like very fast. Like the only thing they perceived. Right, so it's just called, like, why is a minor chord sad? Well, it's social. It's not inherently sad.
That's
These things
true.
are descriptive rules.
Early Christian happy
I've
music,
about that a lot.
the early Christian music from the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, well, I guess 2nd and 3rd, or I can't remember, one of those early centuries AD, was all done in like minor chords, and it was supposed to be joyous.
Of course, right, and you can have sad major chord, major key music, and there, like, he showed me lots of it's very like mind blowing at the massive similarities that like linguistic system or like language and music have, and how also incredibly divergent they are. Because I do think that music is an epiphenomenon that sort of emerged with cognition, but language, I believe, we have a mechanism that allows us to use that because no other animals can.
So I actually had a question. Sorry, Stephanie, I don't mean to
you're
stepping on your hosting toes here. I actually had a question for you two other podcast hosts here, and Stephanie too, of course.
Of course,
you're hosting this podcast.
I'm hosting this one podcast. Yes,
you're phenomenal. It's going great.
Awesome,
you're doing
having a great time. Really going good.
That's part of the
so, okay. We said it would be organic eventually. You just had to light the spark. Right. So language and math are both their own symbolic or representative methods of some facts of the world, or some way of representing the world as we find it into repeatable and sensible kind of little bits, right? Mm-hmm. Now, one very interesting question that always comes up, and it's something actually that I think we got close to it with the discussion about, can you think? So you argued that you could think without words.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
You could think without language. I agree with you there that you could think without language. However, is there an age, is there a point where you can no longer teach someone these sorts of languages, whether it be mathematics or it be if you've never introduced the concept,
feral children have no ability.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
I was thinking of cases of feral children.
Right.
But
There's only one that's very well studied, and I'm going to let you finish the question because I'm really, really curious to see what it is. But in that particular study, there's a lot of ethical issues we couldn't follow up. But it seems that after the critical age, which is somewhere between the ages for phonology, it's 6 months, so crazy young, and then for syntax or grammar, it's from 7 to 11 years old. And then at that, you can notice it. So if you have a child, you'll probably will notice at the point when they're about 7 years old, when I said they started using grammar correctly or like wrong. that means that they're no longer acquiring language.
Right, where they start not using grammar.
They start learning, right? Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So when they use bad grammar, it means that they are learning. They are hearing you do things with a pattern, and then they start doing that. Until then, they acquire it. They have no effort in learning it at all.
Oh, so when they do it bad, they're learning, and everybody deserves a trophy. Correct. You millennial. Just kidding.
It's also no. You know, what's funny? I'm gonna get on a soapbox for 2 seconds, and I will say it's completely useless to correct the grammar of anyone if the language is understood. It doesn't help them, and it doesn't help you. Especially children. So if a children said, I goed, there's no reason to tell them went. They're just going to hear you say goed again. It's because it's irrelevant. Like they will learn it naturally. It's a social thing. But once they've acquired language, they already have it. So when they do things like goed, that's just their brain going through the process of applying the rules that they're hearing you use with other words.
Well, so I guess what I was gonna ask is
yeah.
So I'm always thinking about, because I kind of taught at the graduate level a little bit. I tutored for a long time, different subjects and whatever. And the question I always have is with say mathematics, right? We introduce the concept of a number very early, right? I mean, when a kid's learning how to count, they're probably 5 or 6. Right?
Well, babies know how to recognize groupings of up to a few.
Groupings. Okay, so in some ways, I mean, numbering of things and labeling of things, both of those are kind of intrinsic, right? I would argue.
And we can, you can illustrate that. Like, I know Daniel Everett, he's like super duper controversial because most of them think he's, just full of crap. I mean, I'm one of them, but there are some interesting components. He studied this language in South America called like Piraha or something like, and it's apparently doesn't have a future or past tense, and it also doesn't have any system of counting. So they say like, but here's to really illustrate it at home. Do you genuinely believe that because they don't have words for numbers, that they don't understand the concept that they have 3 children? Like they know there's children, child.
No, well, no.
Of course not. Concepts are before language. You don't think in labels, right? You think in concepts.
But
right. So here's the thing.
Just kidding.
Yeah. Here's the part that I was kind of I'm really interested in Jonathan's answer here, is because like I use math every day. It's definitely math is like a whatever. My PhD might as well have been in math, right? Engineering is just applied to math ultimately at a certain level. I always think of functions and things like calculus and trigonometry and things like that. Anything that uses functions. I always think of functions as similar to the grammar of a language of numbers, right? That functions are like a language. And so I always wonder why when we teach children to young adults mathematics, we introduce the concept of numbers first. I guess it's like introducing the concept of letters first, but we don't even touch functions really until they're in, middle school to high school, right? To me, it's almost as if the first 10 to 11 years of your life, you just learned letters and how letters go together to make words, right? But you never learn how to put them into a sentence to usefully represent something. Do you know what I mean? So I actually wonder then about the ability, because there are a lot of adults who can't think in terms of mathematical functions. Well, right? I would argue that someone who's been, and I think, I don't know, I guess I just always wonder that, like, when I try to explain to my mom, like, I don't know, velocity or something, right? Or she'll listen to my podcast and she'll ask about some math thing I've said or something else, and I'll try to explain it to her, and she's just like, well, I don't get it. Like, I don't see like a graph in my brain. I can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I want to just really, really super quick. I don't know if it's a direct parallel because going back to acquiring versus learning, like whenever you say what you just described, like it would be as if we were learning letters to put together and make words, but never actually have like a functioning thing. That's acquired. We already know that. So what you're learning in school is like orthography.
I'd like to say something about the way that mathematics is acquired, having taught brilliant students and having taught students who I wish had better teachers before me, because it seems as something does cement for math learning. There's this 24-year-old who I taught, who's the girlfriend of a good friend of mine a long time ago, and she could not comprehend what multiplication was. I had to teach her with pebbles. She never got that. So then you have that side of the spectrum. Then you have, I think, the average side of the spectrum where people understand things like, I think that it's, for me, the way that I experience mathematics is, I don't think it's applicable to everybody because, first of all, I was taught it at a very early age. So there's some kind of weird synesthetic part of me that thinks about like rotating masses and like cubes that transform into a circle. Like, for example, with an exponential function, I think about the feeling of compression mixed with the look of a sphere. So that's not relatable. So I think that you can have thought outside. So when I manipulate these things and when I design algorithms, I'm doing them completely outside of verbal stuff. I'm using some other weird kind of thing. But then the question is, can that be reduced to a verbal concept, or is it less than a verbal concept, or am I fooling myself into thinking that I'm not using words when I do this?
So that's really interesting. I mean, I guess that is part of the, I mean, we kind of came full circle back to that original point of, you know, in the 80s and 90s, it was kind of in vogue to talk about visual learners versus auditory learners and whatever, right? And I mean, it's probably part of the reason why we've been given the monstrosity of PowerPoint presentations. You know, it's like trying to merge the worlds together in a weird way. But whenever I try to teach someone applied mathematics for like engineering courses or something, I always try to start by talking about how the graphs of the things look, or how the functions themselves fit together logically, right? That this is just the rate, this is just the rate of change of concentration with time, or position with time, or velocity with time, or whatever, right? When you're trying to get to a higher level, and then that's what a derivative or an integral will do. And you know what I mean? Like
See, I take a little bit of the opposite approach when I'm teaching. Sure. And I try to let them know why they should care about it first. For example, with matrices, I say, first of all, a matrix is a bunch of rows and columns of numbers, and then just forget that for now, because we're not going to talk about that for a while. And then I tell them, imagine a sphere. It's spinning around, and it's made out of a liquid. So when it spins, it goes outward. So you have this sort of flat sphere. That's what a matrix does to a sphere. And then we go from there back to the numbers.
Interesting.
That is an extremely applicable and really good. That's an awesome, man. I'm like, I'm blown. I got shivers just now, dude. I'm like, not even kidding. I'm totally nerding out right now. That's amazing. That's a really, really great explanation for, man.
Is logic a voluntary kind of thinking, or is it involuntary, like we said other thoughts are? It's kind of taking it back to what we were talking about way before, but
there's an experiment.
Is logic voluntary? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, like, is logical thinking, is that a voluntary process, or is it something that you've kind of trained your brain to do, and that you're doing it involuntarily, and it's
I'd say
following
it needs a
certain
lot
habits?
of training.
Can any of us honestly say, can any of us honestly say that if someone Like if The Rock came up to you and like spit on your shoes, can you honestly say you wouldn't get extremely angry? You know what I mean? And not be like, well, logically The Rock can murder me right now with his bare hands, and so although The Rock I've heard is a very nice man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, can any of us really say that we have disengaged that like the angry gorilla part of the brain?
I'm not saying
Not only that, look
disengage
at the popularity of gambling and the empirical results of this game. There's $100 in a pot. You could either take all the money or wait. Oh no, there's $100 in the pot, and let me start over. There's a plate, and there's $100 in a pot, and then you put $1 on the plate. You can either take it or wait until the other person takes their turn, and then the other person would get $2, and then if they wait, you get $3, and so on. The most logical choice is to get you the highest expected amount of money is to take the very first dollar and not let the other person try at all, because then you have a chance of losing. But most people, when they try this out, don't do that. They wait to get the money.
Well, yeah, and well, I think of it this way too. Like it's okay. I'll give you a disgusting example. So let's say I logically understand that if I eat 5 cans of Vienna sausages filled with Tabasco sauce, that it's going to be empty calories, and that I shouldn't do that because of my goal of losing fat. But I want those Vienna sausages and eat them anyway, even though I logically understand the consequences. So yeah, it does. I think it is voluntary. I think you have to. It takes quite a bit of training, like you guys have said, that logic is not something that is just innate, or that it's Well, you know what? Now that I think about it, I don't know. It might be innate, and we just need training to use it.
Seth, I have a question for you.
Yeah, let's have it.
Why did you eat 6 cans of Vienna sausages?
It was only 5. It was only 5, Jonathan, for goodness sake. No,
it's okay.
Since I was in 7th grade, it's so weird because it reminds me of being in poverty, and I wasn't ever really in poverty to begin with, but I would eat a Vienna sauce. I have no idea. I get these weird cravings for like nasty canned meats, and it's disgusting, and there's no reason for it.
Goodness.
Yeah, no, and it's so weird because I'm a big fan of like Spam, you know, and I don't have to eat these things. It's not due to anything. It's like I'll go volunteer. I'll be like going down the aisle, and I'll just be like, okay, well, let me just get some Vienna sausages and fill them up with Tabasco sauce and eat that. And I don't know why I do it, y'all. So that's
what a time.
Yeah, it's
what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive, indeed.
You can buy tiny sausages in cans.
That's right.
Yeah, so Jonathan, your story was reminding me of, I saw a really funny video, and it's based on, I guess, actually kind of a relatively, I think this study was done on a more serious scale. But anyways, the idea is you have kids in a room, and each kid you put a marshmallow in front of them, and you tell them, if you can wait a minute, I'll give you another marshmallow, or you can have that marshmallow now. And the kids will invariably pick the one marshmallow.
Really?
Now.
Well, the ones who don't have better success later in life.
Is that what the study is?
They tested them 10 years later and checked their bank accounts and stuff.
Oh, okay.
Well, let me ask this: like, do you guys think that immediate sort of satiation is innate, and that logic is something we pick up?
I'd say it's more nuanced than that.
Okay. All right. Cool.
I'd say that I'm sorry, there's a lag in the conversation, but
no. Yeah, there is.
There's this has actually been demonstrated. I can't remember through which experiment, but there's an innate amount of interest that we have as human beings that we put on experiences. So let's say you have a very high interest, a very high rate of interest, then waiting is going to be difficult for you. Mm-hmm. So if you have a low rate of interest, that's where that's when you, and this is when your situations where you apply math without even knowing it. Also, when you catch a ball, you're doing differential calculus, but that's beside the point.
Right. And I was are we talking about formal logic, or are we talking about sort of the layman understanding of logic?
I mean, the problem with this kind of argument is that this gets into what's called the naturalist fallacy.
Yeah.
The naturalist fallacy is, I'm sure, as you guys all know, and this is just for everyone who may not, the naturalist fallacy is basically it's called the is ought problem. Because something is a certain way, it ought to be that way. So we've always eaten meat, so we ought to eat meat, right?
Right.
It's kind of like you ascribe a moral claim, a normative moral claim to a factual thing about the way the world is, and assume since that's the way it's been, it must be the right way or the good way, right? It's the way things should be. Now, on the other side of that, I think we're edging kind of close to the idea that it's what's called a just so story, which is we look at the way we have two assumptions coming into it. The first assumption is that we are animals who are natural things, right? So we get free will out of the equation, let's say. And then the second part of that assumption would be that the way that we do things now is logical, is the right, or not logical, let's say. The other assumption then made is that because these things are the way they are now, they must be the right way, right? And if they're the right way, it's because they are the biological way, right? So it's kind of this argument like, why does Billy play acoustic guitar? Oh, because, acoustic guitar gets all the ladies, and then therefore Billy will be able to pass on his genes, and it's better for the species. It's that kind of silly argument, right, where you take a macro scale social thing and you turn it into a biological construct, right? Or you try to explain it using biology when really the two things are so far apart that there's no causal chain left.
But what can I do to excuse 1950s gender roles? I'm just kidding.
Oh God!
So what I was going to say is just quick. What I was going to say is that arguing then that logic is intrinsic or logic is biological, I think kind of edges us kind of close to that problem of saying that because we what is logical?
Well, whatever we say it is.
Well,
that's
exactly. And so we turn it into if we were utilitarians, then we would argue that the logical choice would always be the pragmatic one. And then therefore that is what biology has told us to do, right? If we were nihilists or people who believed that humans are innately selfish, then we would say that the selfish choice is always the logical one and therefore the right choice, or the one that biology would tell us to make. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's almost
axiomatic.
Right. Well,
exactly. Like logic is itself a byproduct of our time and our culture and whatever. And so, or at least how we think of logic is a byproduct of all these other things. I would argue that categorization is innate to us. I would argue that counting is innate to us. I would argue that recognition of patterns is innate to us, right?
Yep.
And all of those things eventually I do think lead to something like logic, like a deductive process. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and they do, right? But I would argue though that subscribing a specific logical system to that is probably a bridge too far. Yeah,
I tend to agree with that, and I've spoken to just to exemplify this. So I've actually used this example, Stephanie, I think, but I'll use it with you guys and hope you haven't heard me say it. So you said that it's sort of it's an innate thing to our brains love to categorize, and I think that is true because you find this in language all the time and in just cognition. So so there's a sport where you have this round orange ball, right? And what is that called?
I feel like I'm being tricked.
No, you're not.
Me too.
No. Don't feel. No. This is very straightforward. So it's a sport, and there is a ball that is used in it. It's very large and orange.
I'm going to put my head out and say basketball.
That's correct. It's a basketball, and whenever you think of a basketball, typically we think sports, right? We think the sport of basketball. However, if you are on a sinking ship and there is nothing in the room but this round orange object, is that still a basketball used only for sports?
I see what you're saying.
Right. So
So you were tricking us.
So concepts, right?
Just at the end. Just at the end.
so this kind of comes full circle back to our idea of like, okay, words or concepts, like, are they stagnant or are they not? Of course they're not, because you can change something you fundamentally understand into a different category and it becomes something fundamentally different.
I mean, I think that this question even edges upon tangentially questions like, do real numbers exist in the universe?
Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah, somewhere out there, there's like a giant golden E. You know what? Like there's a giant gamma with gamma function of whatever floating out there. Like
but if you take
you'll never be able to solve me.
If you take a Viking crystal and shoot a particle at it, then you get like an intrinsic square root. And then how does that exist in the universe? And that just trips me out. But I know all that. Honestly, that's a topic that we keep. Like, I have a list of topics that I want to do that I know are going to take me far too long to do, and like nestled right there in between, between like the Mothman sightings. Oh, those are fun.
And like and other nut stuff that we talk about on my show. There is our numbers intrinsic, right? That whole thing about you find, just people finding the fact that circles or hexagons are a common shape because they're the most, surface tension wise, they're the most efficient use of energy in space.
Well, Chomsky, in a documentary, I think it's called "Is the Tall Man Happy?" I don't know if it's still on Netflix or not.
Sorry.
It's a good one. Yeah. So he illustrates this point, and kind of on the same note of what you're saying, is that it's all these things, as hard of a science as math is, like it's the pinnacle of like objectivity, right? And even at that point, it's still axiomatic. It still only exists because we make it that way, right? Or we recognize it that way. And so Chomsky thinks that we're stuck in the same way. He said that like before gravity was understood, our explanation for the scientific reason an apple falls from a tree is because it desires to fall to the tree. And that's not detailed enough. And then we learned about gravity, and we understand that gravity works, I guess technically not invariably, but pretty darn close, right? It's pretty important law. So he thinks that we're stuck thinking in the same way that people before Newton thought about science.
I don't think Chomsky learned how to program
and that
computers.
We need to
I don't think Chomsky learned to program computers. Computer logic is so different. It's almost he's super mathematical.
He is absolutely, because he literally is a linguistic theorist. All he does, he's brilliant, and he has some really insane works on just why we think and stuff like that. But it's like he ultimately sits in a chair and says this is the way it is, whereas applied linguists will be like, well, judging from our descriptive experiments or objectively, that might not be the case. He's like, yeah, but it's logical, right? So that brings us back full circle.
It's sort of like in the philosophy of science, there's a very famous logician named Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Oh, I know Wittgenstein. He is the bane of my free. People bring him up with linguistics all the time. I'm like, this is not applicable. he thinks he's a linguist, and he was. I don't know.
I was gonna say he's one of he's probably our generation's hot philosopher, I would say, right? Like, and I mean he's kind of like if Nietzsche was like the 60s and 70s, Pushaw kind of philosophy guy. I think Wittgenstein is that our generation's Pushaw philosophy guy. But he has this really interesting quote he's got a number of very interesting quotes. But one of my favorites is, it comes from the Tractatus, which is his famous kind of like treatise on logic. And basically he comes to a point where he says, that of which we know not, we cannot speak. Mm-hmm. And basically he makes the argument that of things that we can't measure, of things that we can't logically come to, like this question of consciousness, we just shouldn't say anything, because we can't even start, right? How can you start on if you're starting on the grounds of like a priori knowledge, without any experience or anything else to back it up, then you're kind of already up shit's creek, because excuse my language, but you're already stuck without a paddle. You're like, you have nothing else to hold on to, and everything becomes possible.
He's never heard of politicians.
Oh my gosh! That's what kills me. Have you guys heard of the? It's a relatively new fallacy called Newton's flaming laser sword.
That's new.
That sounds new.
I thought that was from the tome.
Okay, so it says that if someone brings up a topic that is non-falsifiable, don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's
it's
basically
a razor.
what.
Sorry, it's not a fallacy.
Oh, okay.
But
that is. I don't know why they don't call that Popper's dictum or something.
Yeah, it's the same shit.
So funny.
Same stuff, actually. It's like that Wittgenstein says, oh, yeah, if you can't talk, I don't know, man. I don't buy that at all. Like, that's the whole point.
Well, also,
if
you Gödel's incompleteness theorem, the universe, is it statistical or not, etc. I'm sure you could make up my response from those two things.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite philosophers of science is Karl Popper. And basically that's the argument he makes for whether or not something is scientific or scientifically valid. Or how does science happen in the real world, right? And his argument is that it happens by falsifying currently held beliefs, right? Science is like a chipping away. I just used this analogy in another thing, right? It's in another interview. It's like it's a chipping away of falsehoods till we get to something like the truth, right?
Right, something like the truth. That's an important distinction for the folks at home, is that the scientists will never say, this is true. This is true as we know it now, right?
And that drives some people insane. The people who think that there's absolute truth.
People can't. There's a hard T truth out there. But see, the thing is, to think that there's a hard T truth, I would argue, is logical, but it's not science.
Right.
It's like science can't exist that way. It can't. You can't say this. We figured it out. That's the universe.
Well, I would say science can like point to the hard T truth, but it can't actually ever get to it.
Well, that's the idea, right? It's the hows, not the whys.
Right. So then the people assuming that there's a hard T truth are equally as logical as people assuming that there isn't one, right?
Yeah, but it's also like, that's also like that silly. What was that silly argument that floated around the internet for a little bit that was like 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2?
Oh my god!
And it was like some weird. It was using some like weird series expansion or something
like
that it showed like
grandma, man.
Yeah, it was something weird like that, but it's like the same thing. I mean, if you're at a point where your theory has been proven or has worked 99.99999% of the time, you know what I mean?
Right.
Or like every time, and you're just waiting for that next time for it to be false. It makes it very hard to say that this is still just an idea, or that you know what I mean? Like my one of my chemistry teachers used to say that the proof is in the pudding. You know, that was like his thing every time
I don't even know
we were
what that
talking about
means.
quantum stuff. Well, whenever we talked about quantum, so this was a class that I took with him on the use of quantum mechanics to determine things about chemicals from their infrared spectrum and other kinds of spectrums. And we'd come to there's a certain point in that class you can only ever solve one equation in that class, because once you get to the next form of that equation, it becomes impossible. You need a computer.
Wow.
Right? And so if you're teaching.
Different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you're trying to solve the potential function,
the infinite well.
Yeah. If you're trying to solve the infinite well for a single electron atom, then you're okay. But once you get to 2, it becomes too computationally difficult for you to do it by hand, right? And so he would just kind of be like, okay, well, how do we know it works? All this math's too complicated. Well, the proof's in the pudding. And then he would take out his laser pointer and like shine it at your face. He'd be like, look, lasers, we have lasers, it works.
Right.
And it's really, I think it's true. And it's, it has nothing to do with
I didn't get the laser thing. I thought you just meant that
certainly does not
like to shine lasers in people's faces.
He kind of probably did too. Yeah.
My only problem with that, and this is, I'm aware this is like not a good argument, but you can never be entirely certain that what you're perceiving in your context is actually true, like that your perception of reality is correct. Because maybe
that's a huge question.
Right, like maybe things work in this little thing we've made up, but maybe that's not really what's going on at all. So
it's the idea of descriptive parameters, right? Like the rules that we follow because we're already following.
Yeah.
Well, on that question, I always like to joke that Descartes came up with that same problem once, and he solved it in such a way that he was then never able to do anything else useful ever again.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Descartes solved it and was like, well, all I can know is that I exist, and I guess I'm retarded.
Right.
What else can I know?
I think that's kind of a problem with most philosophy is that you end up at that point, and then you can logically justify ignoring pretty much everything going on.
Oh my goodness, we can do a whole thing on infinitely regressive philosophical arguments. It drives me crazy.
I think that's what I do in my head automatically. That's like my autopilot.
I took a course on Marxism in undergrad in philosophy, because it was considered, like, it's still considered, and it really was a phenomenal class. It's considered like one of the best philosophy classes at UNH, and probably one of the best ones on the East Coast, I'd imagine, at least available to people not in, like, super crazy, super fancy colleges or whatever. And and it's taught by a philosopher who actually has his own podcast, or he did have his own podcast.
Bring
I don't know
him
if he still
to
does it.
me.
Yeah, I think it was on New Hampshire NPR for a
no
while.
way.
I should see if he's interested in being on a podcast. Even.
Yeah, I'm kidding. Honestly.
Yeah, he's awesome. So his name is Nick Smith. He teaches at UNH still, and so he's like famous for the philosophy of apologies, actually, and like what does an apology actually mean? What is it worth? You know what I mean? Anyways, this Marxism course though is like, it's famous at the school because you take it, and he's so effective at arguing from the position of like capitalism is evil and capitalism is making you think the things that you think. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it's almost like being outside the Matrix, but like you're in the Matrix and you're like, everything you're seeing is the Matrix. And so whatever you say to me that says I'm not in the Matrix, I can just say you're in the Matrix. Right? That's like that's ultimately what that argument becomes. It's like, well, whatever. We only buy lamps. We only buy jewelry because, capitalism's telling us to buy jewelry and it's all marketing, whatever. And you're like, well, I like this. I think the stones are pretty. No, you only think they're pretty because of capitalism. You know what I mean? And it becomes this thing where like, for like a year, you're taking this course and you're just like, every day you're like, oh, I don't see any way out of this problem. Right. You know what I mean? You're like, I don't see any way out of this argument.
Newton's flaming laser sword.
Yes, and then finally you end of the course and you like have a summer off and you come back and like your Nikes and your you come back with like a new
eating your American
bag or whatever.
All your capitalist contraband.
Yeah, exactly. You come back with everything and you're like, well, I guess I don't care anymore. Like I got through the class. I guess the fact that argument's like was really hard to refute doesn't matter to us anymore.
Well, I guess because you can't perceive or really know or trust anything that you're not actually like experiencing immediately. So in the end, the only thing you have is like falsifiable evidence in your context, and you can't make like a legit judgment off of anything but that.
Last Tuesdayism.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is that?
Oh, it just reminds me of last Tuesdayism, where you say the universe was created in all of its places, everybody with their thoughts in their minds, and the trees with their rings in them. Last Tuesday.
Prove him wrong, right?
Prove him wrong, exactly. And that's the thing. I love Elon Musk comes out and is like, or was it Elon Musk that said we're in a simulation, or he thought maybe
No, he was certain of it. He was like, the logic behind it was, he said, because technology has advanced so quickly and humans die out so fast, or they should, given our like limited resources, that it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that we are not in a simulation. And he gave something like some kind of fraction, like a billionth or something like that. Like there's like,
poor Elon Musk, he tried so hard.
Honestly, it's like he could have. I know, really. That argument, like, when that happened, like, everyone I knew on Facebook was like, Chris, you gotta see this. This guy, like, invented a battery. It's like, he didn't even invent a battery. He just bought the rights to a battery from someone else. Like, that's not interesting.
I think he has a point to... I've seen that way before Musk, that the universe is a simulation, is when you see some kind of inconsistencies in mathematical perception, like that calculations don't work out exactly the way that you would anticipate them, like the rays of the sun are not at the right angle, or there are things which don't line up the mathematics that we currently have.
But I guess the problem I have with that argument, at least, is that it could be then anything.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? We could be, like Frank Reynolds says... We could be floating around in a turtle's dream. You know what I mean?
We might be. In fact, I think it's likely we are.
That's useless.
Yeah, we could be in anything, right? It could be aliens. Giorgio could be right. It could just be aliens.
Yeah,
I mean, it's such a silly, ultimately.
It's
argument.
like conspiracy theory. Like it's even farther than that. It becomes to the point to where it's not useful, which is sort of.
So can we say that
it's not like Occam's razor, right?
Yeah.
Well, it becomes like a pragmatic approach. It's like, okay, well, whatever. We're all in a simulation. We got to live in this simulation.
Exactly.
Still.
Yeah.
So like I better still go to work.
But
because my boss isn't going to take, or the guy at McDonald's isn't going to take. No, it's a simulation. Give me a burger as an answer.
Also, I know what happy
you know
is.
What I mean, unless maybe you're Elon Musk and you show up and you're like, I was just a simulation.
But I think that.
Go
ahead.
No, that was it. I can keep bragging on Elon Musk. Send me a Tesla, Elon Musk.
Somebody should, because everybody that's my age, I think, and probably about a decade younger than most of you, is like huge Elon Musk fan.
Oh yeah, I'm actually a huge Elon Musk fan.
I am a huge Elon Musk fan, but I don't get information about simulations based off of Elon Musk theories, because I feel like he's like creative in kind of the same way that writers are creative, and then you just take it too far. Like you have one kind of thinking that you're aware of, and you take that way too far to the place where everybody else is like, I don't know what's going on here.
Well, it's the same. It's the same. Like I'm obviously not going to go on a political tangent, but it's the same thing. Like
but you are.
So Noam Chomsky is a foundational linguist, right? He come out like the dude is like invented so many theories in the 50s that still some of them hold up as much as he's changed them all. But he also has these, what's it called? Anarcho-socialist, right? Mm-hmm. And so he talks about this stuff, and people believe all of his rhetoric because he's a brilliant linguist. It's very strange. Mm-hmm. So the same thing with Elon Musk for me is that, like, yeah, I don't believe we're in a simulation, but I do want a self-sustaining solar-powered car that I never have to fill up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's the myth of the... It's the myth of the lab code, right? It's
right, exactly.
They seem to be really good at this, although everyone should respect my lab code.
Right.
And everyone's lab code on this particular episode should be very well respected.
Everyone, and listen, if they got a blank for non-blank logo on their thing, then we're
in second grade, talking about lab codes, just random, maybe a little bit of a refresher or whatever. I wore a lab coat to school as a mad scientist that had legitimate cadaver juice on it. It was my mom's.
Oh,
wow. No.
You were a cool little kid. Kind of little kid I'd like to meet. That was awesome, dude.
Totally.
Cool thing hilarious. Ever did. Yeah, no, that pales in comparison. Did we have a proper stopping point? Because I think it's just going to stop.
What were we talking about? We were talking about Halloween.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll figure it out.
And that's the end of part 2. If you enjoyed these episodes, you could support Blank for Non-Blank at patreon.com/blank for non-blank. Or you could continue to support Breaking Math at breakingmathpodcast.com/blank for non-blank. And for more content from Blank for Non-Blank, you could subscribe at the link found at tinyurl.com/batteryhorse. Thank you, and keep breaking math.